Night arrives slowly in all places. Not with a sudden darkness, but with a patient dimming, as though the world itself understands that rest must never be rushed. Tonight, you are invited into such a night. Imagine a stone-built house resting far from modern roads, its walls thick enough to keep out urgency, its windows narrow and kind to candlelight. Outside, the world has already grown quiet. No engines hum, no screens glow. Only the distant sigh of wind brushing against ivy and the occasional settling sound of a structure that has been standing longer than memory can measure. Inside, the air is warm but not heavy. It carries the faint scent of beeswax polish, old wood, and something softer beneath it, linen that has been washed, pressed, and folded with care. The floor does not creak in complaint, only in acknowledgement, as if recognizing each careful step. This is not a place for haste. It never has been. The light here comes from candles arranged with intention. Their flames do not flicker wildly. They burn low and steady, casting slow-moving shadows that stretch and soften the sharpness of stone. Every surface seems to absorb sound, encouraging voices to remain low, encouraging thoughts to settle. You may notice, if you listen closely, how silence behaves differently here. It is not empty. It is full of waiting, of memory, of rituals that have been repeated so many times they no longer need explanation. Tonight is important, but not dramatic. It is a night shaped by tradition rather than emotion, by structure rather than impulse. The kind of night where expectations are understood without being spoken, where everyone present knows their role and performs it quietly, almost tenderly. This is a wedding night, but not as modern stories often imagine. In noble households of centuries past, marriage was rarely a private affair. It was a binding of names, lands, alliances, and futures. Love, if it arrived at all, often came later, after familiarity had softened formality. And so, even this most intimate threshold of life unfolded within a carefully ordered frame. The room prepared for the couple is spacious but restrained. No excess, no indulgence. The bed is large, carved from dark wood, its posts smoothed by generations of hands. Linen sheets lie folded with precision, their pale surface catching the candlelight like calm water. Nearby, heavy curtains rest half-drawn, as though even fabric understands the value of discretion. Nothing here asks to be examined closely. Everything asks to be accepted as it is. This room has seen many nights like this one. It remembers footsteps that paused at the doorway. It remembers breaths held slightly longer than usual. It remembers the quiet courage of people stepping into roles larger than themselves. In such places, privacy was never entirely solitary. There were witnesses not to acts, but to outcomes. Not to moments, but to continuity. Sometimes a trusted attendant waited just beyond the door. Sometimes a family member lingered in a nearby chamber, not listening, not watching, only remaining present in case tradition required acknowledgement at dawn. No one spoke openly about it. Speech was unnecessary. Silence here carried agreement. If this feels unfamiliar, let it remain so. There is no need to compare it to the present. This story asks only that you observe, gently, from a distance softened by time. And as you settle into listening, you may notice your own breathing beginning to slow, matching the rhythm of candle flames, matching the patience of walls that have outlasted generations. Before we drift deeper into tonight's gentle journey, remember to subscribe to Tedious History for Sleep. Here, you'll always find peaceful stories that soothe the heart and quiet the mind. Where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment. Your presence adds warmth to this quiet corner of the night. Now, return your attention to the room. The chairs have been arranged and then quietly removed. The final formalities completed without ceremony. Footsteps recede down a long corridor, fading until even the echo dissolves into stone. The door closes not with finality, but with care. And behind it remains a space suspended between public obligation and private experience. What happens next is not our focus. This story is not interested in details, nor in intrusion. Instead, it lingers on the atmosphere surrounding the moment the way history often does. It notices what remains when voices fall away. The hush, the order, the sense that something has been set into motion simply because the world expects it to continue turning. In these older societies, the body was not entirely one's own. It belonged partly to lineage, partly to law, partly to time itself. Personal feeling, while real, was rarely centered. What mattered was confirmation, continuity, and the assurance that tomorrow would unfold according to expectation. And yet, within that structure, there was still humanity. A pause before the candle is extinguished. a careful smoothing of fabric, a breath taken slowly, deliberately, as though to gather calm. History is often loud when we read it. Battles, decrees, revolutions. But nights like this passed quietly, almost invisibly, shaping the future without spectacle. Generations followed because of rooms like this one, rooms that asked for composure rather than passion, patience rather than urgency. As you listen, you may find yourself feeling unexpectedly at ease. There is comfort in predictability, comfort in knowing what is expected, comfort in rituals that remove the burden of decision. And perhaps that is why these stories still resonate, because even now, long after the candles have burned down, the human nervous system still recognizes safety in order and rest in repetition. So allow yourself to rest here for a while. Let the stone walls hold the night steady. Let the silence do its quiet work. Let history unfold without demanding your judgment. This is only the beginning. The doors have closed, but the story is just opening slowly, gently, like sleep itself. Morning has not yet arrived, but the house already knows what the next day will bring. Old buildings carry time differently. They anticipate before they remember, holding tomorrow gently in their beams and corridors. In the noble households of earlier centuries, nights like this were not isolated events. They belonged to a larger rhythm, one that moved steadily through generations, guided less by emotion and more by continuity. Marriage in this world was not a sudden leap of the heart. It was a carefully placed stone in a long architectural line, aligned with land boundaries, family names, and future inheritances. The people involved understood this from childhood. They grew up watching ceremonies unfold with measured grace, learning when to speak and when silence served better. Daily life followed a pattern that rarely surprised anyone. Meals arrived at familiar hours, footsteps echoed along the same corridors, and conversations repeated themes already known. This predictability was not dullness. It was reassurance, a way of telling the nervous system that nothing unexpected would be required tonight. The wedding itself had likely passed earlier in the day, attended by witnesses who smiled politely and departed before dusk. What remained now was not celebration, but completion. Completion mattered deeply in a society that valued proof over sentiment. Words spoken before witnesses needed to be matched by actions acknowledged afterward, even if those actions were never described aloud. And so, the house held its breath in a very particular way. Not tense, not anxious, simply attentive, like a librarian waiting for a book to be returned to its shelf. Somewhere beyond the closed door, the night continued as it always had. Candles burned lower, their wax pooling slowly, obeying gravity without haste. In the corridors outside, an attendant might have paused briefly, adjusting a shawl or listening only for silence itself. Once that silence felt complete, they would move on without comment. This presence was symbolic rather than intrusive. No one wished to know details. They only needed assurance that tradition had followed its familiar path. In such customs, privacy existed within boundaries rather than freedom. It was protected not by absence, but by mutual agreement not to look too closely. This may feel distant to modern ears, yet it carried its own kind of safety. Roles were defined, expectations clear, and ambiguity kept at bay. Ambiguity, after all, invites worry. Clear structure allows the mind to rest. As the hours passed, nothing remarkable needed to happen. The importance of the night lay not in intensity, but in its quiet inevitability. History often moves this way forward, softly, through rooms where no one raises their voice. The future is shaped less by grand gestures than by nights completed according to plan. You may notice how the pace of the story slows here. There is no urgency to move ahead, no revelation demanding attention. Instead, the narrative lingers on small, ordinary details. The weight of a door, the texture of linen, the steady, reliable passage of time. If you allow it, these details begin to work on you, breathing deepens. Thoughts loosen their grip. This is the same effect such environments had on those who lived within them. Order calmed the mind, even when the heart felt uncertain, and uncertainty was common. Many couples entered these rooms as near strangers, bound by obligation rather than affection. Yet the structure surrounding them carried them forward regardless. It offered a path already worn smooth by countless others. There is something deeply human in this reliance on ritual. When emotions feel too large or unclear, repetition offers steadiness. The night outside continues its quiet watch. Stars hold their positions, indifferent to human arrangements, yet somehow lending them significance. Centuries later, we look back and often focus on what seems restrictive. But those who lived then experienced these customs as simply the way the world worked. Judgment was not part of the moment. Presence was enough. And presence is all that is asked of you now. There is nothing to solve, nothing to analyze. You are simply listening, letting the story pass through you like a slow current. The mind does not need to hold on to every detail. As dawn approaches, though still unseen, the house prepares to return to its daytime order. The night will fold itself away neatly, as it always does. What remains will be acknowledgement rather than discussion. A signal that the expected has occurred. In this world, even intimacy left traces only in symbols. Sometimes a folded cloth, sometimes a word exchanged between elders, sometimes nothing more than a door opened at the correct hour. These symbols carried weight not because of what they revealed, but because of what they allowed to proceed. Land transfers, titles, futures unfolding without dispute. The individuals involved often disappeared into these processes. Their feelings became secondary to the larger story being written around them. And yet, within that larger story, each person still breathed, still felt the texture of the moment, still existed quietly within their own awareness. History rarely records that inner life. It moves past it, noting outcomes instead. But in the stillness of a night like this, that inner life mattered. Even if no one asked about it, even if it was never spoken. As you listen, you may feel a gentle distance forming. Not detachment, but space. Space where the mind can rest without needing to engage. Space where the body recognizes a familiar signal. It is safe to let go. This is how the story intends to guide you. Not toward excitement, but toward ease. The night continues to deepen, and with it, the sense that everything is unfolding as it should. No intervention required. Soon, we will follow the story further toward a quiet realization that lies not in action, but in meaning. For now, remain here. Let the order beneath the quiet hold you. Behind the closed door, time does not rush forward. It stretches, becoming wide and unhurried, as if the night itself has decided to slow its pace out of respect for what is unfolding. In houses like this, doors were never slammed. They were closed gently, with the understanding that sound carried meaning and quiet was a form of care. The corridor outside settles almost immediately. Shadows lean back into their corners, and the faint warmth from nearby candles begins to soften the cool stone. Nothing dramatic marks this moment. No music swells, no voices rise, no unseen audience waits for proof of passion. Instead, there is a sense of being enclosed within layers of walls, of custom, of time. The world narrows to a single room, held steady by everything built around it. For centuries, this narrowing was intentional. It allowed private acts to exist without being fully private, acknowledged without being described. The people who designed these rituals understood something subtle about the human mind. When boundaries are clear, anxiety has less space to grow. Beyond the door, an unspoken agreement takes hold. No one listens. No one wonders too deeply. Curiosity is not forbidden, but it is restrained. This restraint is what allows the night to remain calm. In many households, a quiet signal would come later, never now, never immediately. The night was allowed to pass undisturbed, as though sleep itself were part of the ceremony. Sleep, after all, is also a form of surrender. It asks the body to trust that nothing harmful will occur while consciousness loosens its grip. Those who lived in these rooms understood that instinctively. They had grown up with nights lit only by flame, with silence thick enough to feel. Modern minds often imagine such settings as tense or oppressive. But for many, they were simply familiar. Familiarity, even when imperfect, can be deeply soothing. The brain relaxes when it knows what comes next. The bed itself is not the focus here. It exists quietly, like everything else, fulfilling its purpose without drawing attention. The linens are cool at first touch, then quickly warmed. Their weight is reassuring, anchoring the body to the present moment. Somewhere nearby, a candle is extinguished. Not abruptly, but with a practiced breath, leaving behind a soft trail of smoke that curls upward and disappears. Darkness settles without resistance. The kind of darkness that does not threaten, only encloses. This is where history often goes silent. Records skip ahead to morning, to acknowledgments and outcomes. But silence does not mean emptiness. It means the moment is allowed to belong only to those inside it. Even so, the night does not exist solely for them. It serves the larger structure as well. By morning, the household will resume its rhythm. Servants will move through corridors with practiced ease, voices low, eyes attentive but uncurious. The door will open at the expected time. Nothing more will be required. This predictability was the quiet engine of aristocratic life. It ensured continuity without constant negotiation, and continuity was valued above almost everything else. It promised stability in a world where uncertainty often arrived without warning. As you listen, you may notice how little effort the story demands of you. There are no details to remember, no names to track. This is intentional. Sleep stories are not puzzles to solve. They are spaces to inhabit briefly, then leave behind as rest takes over. If your thoughts wander, that is perfectly welcome. The story does not need your full attention to continue. It will move forward on its own, like a river flowing steadily whether observed or not. In this way, it mirrors the nights it describes. Present, continuous, unconcerned with being witnessed. Many generations passed through similar rooms, each believing their experience unique, yet shaped by the same quiet framework. History often compresses these lives into dates and titles. But here, we allow them to exist simply as people moving through time. They felt the same fatigue after long days, the same need for rest. And on nights like this, they too likely listened to the sounds of the house settling, wood contracting, stone releasing the day's warmth. These sounds are deeply ancient. They speak directly to parts of the brain that evolved long before modern noise. It is no wonder that such environments encourage sleep. They aligned with the body's oldest expectations. As the night continues, even thought begins to soften. Ideas lose their sharp edges. What remains is sensation without urgency, presence without demand. You may feel your shoulders lower slightly. Your breathing deepen without instruction. This is the body recognizing safety, a signal older than language. In the world of this story, safety came not from freedom, but from structure, from knowing one's place in the unfolding pattern. That may feel foreign or even uncomfortable to modern sensibilities, but within the context of its time, it offered reassurance. There is no need to agree with it. Observation is enough. The night does not ask for judgment. It simply continues. Soon, something small but meaningful will be noticed not as a shock, but as a gentle realization. A discovery not about action, but about meaning. For now, remain behind the closed door of the story. Let time move softly around you. Nothing more is required. Morning does not arrive suddenly in this house. It approaches in stages, first as a thinning of darkness, then as a gentle cooling of the air that tells the walls another day has begun. Before light reaches the windows, the building is already awake in its own way. It listens inwardly, attentive to signs that need no words. In the world we are visiting, morning carried responsibility. It was not only the start of a new day, but the moment when private events gently crossed into public acknowledgement. No one hurried toward this crossing. Haste would have felt inappropriate, almost disrespectful to the night that had just passed. Somewhere in the household, an attendant stirred. They did not rush, nor did they linger unnecessarily. Their movements were shaped by familiarity, guided by routines learned long ago. Every step knew where to land, every pause knew how long to last. This was not curiosity at work. It was duty softened by experience. The door remained closed for a while longer, exactly as expected. Its stillness carried more meaning than any announcement could have. In such houses, silence often functioned as confirmation. When nothing sounded wrong, everything was assumed to be right. This understanding allowed mornings to unfold without tension. The household trusted the night to complete what it had been given. Light finally reached the curtains, not bright but pale, filtering through fabric chosen to temper the day. It painted the room in quiet tones, easing the transition from darkness. The story does not follow what happens inside. That boundary remains intact, just as it did for those who lived it. Instead, we stay with the atmosphere that surrounds the moment, the way anticipation rests without pressure. Some traditions called for a symbolic sign later in the morning. Not spoken of openly, not displayed for spectacle, but quietly acknowledged. These symbols varied by place and time. Sometimes they were objects, sometimes gestures, sometimes simply the absence of doubt. What mattered was not the symbol itself, but what it allowed to proceed. Once recognized, life could move forward without hesitation. Inheritance laws, alliances, titles, and futures all leaned gently on these confirmations. They were small hinges on which large doors turned. It is easy, from a distance, to see only the imbalance of power in such systems. That imbalance was real and often heavy. But within the moment itself, people rarely stood outside their world to analyze it. They lived inside its rhythms, finding stability where they could. Stability, even when imperfect, offered rest. And rest was a precious resource in eras where life could be unpredictable. The household begins to breathe outward again. Corridors accept footsteps, doors open softly, voices remain low. Nothing about this transition is dramatic. It does not need to be. Drama belonged to stories told later, often by those far removed from the original quiet. The lived experience was simpler. Breakfast would be served at the usual hour. Conversations would follow familiar paths. There would be no announcement, no raised glasses, no public retelling. Acknowledgement happened almost invisibly. This invisibility was intentional. It protected dignity by avoiding scrutiny. In many ways, this discretion was a form of care. Not perfect, not equal, but recognizable as an attempt to preserve calm. As you listen, you may notice how little tension exists in this part of the story. The absence is not accidental. The nervous system relaxes when outcomes feel assured. Uncertainty is what keeps it alert. Here, uncertainty has been gently set aside. The expected has occurred, and the day may continue. The mind, like the household, prefers this kind of closure. Not finality, but completion. Completion allows energy to settle. It tells the body there is no unfinished business demanding attention. That is why mornings like this carried a subtle relief. Even if emotions were complex, the structure held firm. History often skips these moments because they seem unremarkable. Yet they were essential. Without them, the larger narrative could not move forward smoothly. Small rituals stabilized vast systems. As centuries passed, these customs slowly changed, but their psychological function remained familiar. Even now, we seek signs that things are settled. A nod, a message received, a door closed gently. These signals allow us to rest. They tell us we are safe to let go. In this story, the morning symbol does exactly that. It closes a chapter without noise. You may feel your own thoughts beginning to soften again. The story offers no new questions to answer. It simply continues, steady and unintrusive. Like daylight spreading across stone, there is nothing here that demands judgment. Only observation, and observation, when unforced, can be deeply calming. It asks nothing but presence. Soon, we will move further into reflection. Not to analyze the custom, but to consider what it reveals about time, silence, and human adaptation. For now, remain in this quiet morning. Let its predictability ease you. The house has returned to order. And with that return, the story gently opens another layer. Silence in this world was never empty. It was carefully shaped, maintained like a garden where nothing loud was allowed to grow too quickly. People learned early that quiet was not the absence of meaning, but the container that held it safely. From childhood, members of these households absorbed silence as a skill. They learned when to speak softly, when to lower their eyes, and when to let a moment pass without comment. These habits settled into the body until restraint felt natural rather than forced. In the corridors after morning acknowledgement, conversations resumed with remarkable ease. No one circled the previous night, and no one asked questions that did not need answers. The absence of inquiry was itself a form of reassurance. History often frames silence as repression. Yet within this context, silence functioned as protection. It allowed people to move forward without reopening vulnerability. In societies structured by lineage, exposure carried risk. The less spoken, the fewer misunderstandings could arise. Quiet preserved stability in a way words sometimes disrupted. You might imagine the faces at breakfast calm and composed. Expressions practiced but not false, gestures unremarkable. The ordinary rhythm returned quickly, like water settling after a stone sinks. This return to normalcy was deeply comforting. It told everyone that the system remained intact. Predictability was the language of safety. The human nervous system responds to such signals instinctively. When nothing changes abruptly, vigilance relaxes. The body understands that it may lower its guard. For those living then, nights like this did not stand apart as extraordinary. They blended into the ongoing flow of days. What mattered was not the experience itself, but that it fit seamlessly into expectation. Modern perspectives often search for emotional intensity. They look for confession, for conflict, for resolution spoken aloud. But these stories were not built that way. They were built on continuity rather than climax. Meaning accumulated slowly, almost invisibly. Life progressed through repetition rather than revelation. In this sense, silence carried responsibility. It bore the weight of social order without drawing attention to itself. Words were spared so that structure could endure. You may notice how this part of the story feels especially even. There is no rise, no fall, only a steady line forward. This is intentional, mirroring the lived texture of such lives. Even emotions, when present, were rarely expressed outwardly. They stayed close to the body, known privately rather than shared. This inwardness shaped a particular kind of resilience. Resilience does not always appear as strength. Sometimes it looks like quiet endurance. Sometimes it is simply the ability to continue without disruption. As you listen, you might feel a subtle loosening in your chest or shoulders. The absence of conflict allows your body to follow the story without bracing. Nothing here requires defense. The story becomes less about events and more about atmosphere, about how time feels when it is allowed to move without interruption. Atmosphere is where sleep often begins. These households were designed with that in mind, whether consciously or not. Thick walls, muted colors, predictable routines. Everything worked together to lower stimulation. Even light was controlled carefully. Candles and curtains softened transitions so the eyes never had to adjust abruptly. The environment guided the body gently from one state to another. Such care did not stem from modern psychology. It arose from long observation. People noticed what unsettled and what soothed, then built accordingly. Silence proved reliable. It prevented escalation, contained uncertainty, and allowed individuals to remain within their roles. Roles, once accepted, reduced decision-making. Decision-making is tiring. The mind relaxes when choices are few. Ritual removes the burden of constant evaluation. That is why these systems endured for so long. They conserved mental and emotional energy. Even if they limited freedom, they offered rest. From the distance of centuries, we may critique them. From within the moment, they simply felt like the way life was organized. Familiarity softened their edges. As the day progressed beyond morning, attention shifted fully to practical matters. Schedules resumed, responsibilities reclaimed focus. The night slipped quietly into the past. And yet, that night continued to exist within the larger structure. It had done its work without noise. It needed no retelling. Stories like this survived not because they were dramatic. They survived because they were foundational. They supported generations without drawing attention to themselves. As you rest with this realization, the story invites you to do the same. To allow certain thoughts to pass without commentary. Not everything needs to be named. Your mind may already be practicing this. Drifting, returning, drifting again. This gentle movement is welcome. Sleep often arrives through repetition. The same reassurance offered again and again until resistance fades. The story provides that reassurance quietly. Nothing unexpected will happen here. The narrative will continue to unfold evenly. You are safe to let your awareness soften. Soon, the story will turn toward reflection. Not to judge the past, but to notice what remains timeless within it. The connection between silence, safety, and rest. For now, stay with this calm middle ground, where nothing presses forward and nothing pulls back. The space between is where rest deepens. The silence has carried its meaning well. It continues to do so even now. And as it does, the story moves gently onward. Time, in houses like this, did not announce itself loudly. It revealed its presence through repetition rather than change. Days followed one another with subtle variation, enough to prevent stagnation, but never enough to disturb the underlying calm. Repetition was not seen as monotony. It was understood as reassurance. When yesterday resembled today, and today promised to resemble tomorrow, the mind could rest more easily. The people who lived within these rhythms rarely described them as restrictive. They simply experienced them as the natural texture of life. Structure was not questioned, because it had always been there. From morning rituals to evening quiet, everything unfolded with an almost ceremonial steadiness. Even leisure followed predictable patterns. This predictability softened the edges of uncertainty. Acceptance grew quietly in such environments. Not as resignation, but as familiarity. The body learns to adapt when resistance offers no advantage. You may notice how this acceptance feels different from surrender. It is less dramatic, more neutral. It allows energy to flow without obstruction. In historical records, acceptance is rarely named. It leaves little trace because it does not protest. Yet it is one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior. Within marriages formed by arrangement, acceptance often preceded affection. Comfort arrived before intimacy. Over time, shared routine created a form of closeness. Closeness did not always require passion. Sometimes it emerged from shared silence. Being present together without pressure to perform carried its own bond. This story lingers in that space, the space where nothing is demanded beyond continuity. It does not ask whether the system was fair or unfair. Judgment belongs to another time. This moment exists only to be observed gently. Observation, without conclusion, is inherently calming. As centuries passed, the world outside these walls grew louder. Industry, movement, and speed began to dominate daily life. Yet inside, many households clung to slower rhythms. Slowness became a form of resistance without ever being named as such. It preserved a pace aligned with the human nervous system. Even change arrived gradually. You may feel how this pace affects you now. The absence of urgency invites your thoughts to drift. The story does not chase them. Drifting is not distraction here. It is participation. The narrative welcomes partial attention. When the mind stops working to keep up, the body often follows. Muscles loosen, breathing deepens. This is not accidental. Stories shaped like this were told quietly in the past, sometimes by elders, sometimes by the environment itself. The creak of stairs, the settling of beams, the regular passage of footsteps. These sounds created continuity across generations. Children grew up hearing the same night noises their grandparents once heard. Familiarity traveled through sound. Sound, when predictable, becomes comforting. It tells the brain that the world is stable. Silence, when structured, does the same. That is why nights like the one described here mattered. They reinforced the sense that life followed known patterns. Even significant transitions fit within expectation. Marriage, in this sense, was less a rupture than a continuation. It moved the story forward without changing its tone. The melody remained familiar. As you listen, you may feel the narrative flattening deliberately, not becoming dull, but smoothing itself. Sharp edges dissolve. This smoothing mirrors the way memory works. Intense details fade first, leaving behind general impressions. What remains is feeling rather than fact. Feeling is easier to carry into sleep. It does not demand analysis. It simply exists. The past often reaches us this way, not as clear images, but as atmosphere. A sense of quiet rooms, slow mornings, unspoken understandings. Atmosphere is resilient. It survives even when details are lost. That is why stories like this can still soothe centuries later. They touch something fundamental. The desire for order, for safety, for nights that end as expected. This desire crosses time. Modern life often interrupts these patterns. Noise, choice, and speed fragment attention. Rest becomes something to schedule rather than something that arrives naturally. In contrast, the world of this story allowed rest to emerge organically. It was woven into daily structure. The environment did much of the work. You may feel a subtle longing for that simplicity, not for the limitations, but for the calm. This longing is gentle, not urgent. The story does not ask you to wish for the past. It only invites you to notice what remains useful. Slowness, repetition, quiet. These elements still exist, even now. They simply require permission to surface. Permission is what this moment offers. As the narrative continues, it gradually releases its hold on specifics. It becomes more like a lullaby than a chronicle. Content matters less than cadence. Cadence carries you forward. It rocks attention back and forth until effort fades. The body recognizes this rhythm instinctively. You may already feel the pull of rest strengthening. Thoughts grow less linear, more associative. This is welcome. The story will not introduce anything new to hold on to. It will continue to circle familiar ground. Circling creates safety. In many traditions, circular movement symbolizes continuity. Beginnings and endings blur. Sleep itself follows this pattern. As night leads to morning and morning returns to night, the cycle remains intact. Nothing is lost, only transformed. Within that cycle, individual moments dissolve into the larger flow. Significance lies in belonging rather than standing out. This realization is calming. Belonging removes the need to assert oneself. It allows presence without effort. The nervous system responds with ease. As you rest with this understanding, the story gently prepares to shift again, not toward action, but toward reflection. Reflection that does not ask for answers. For now, remain within repetition. Let it smooth your thoughts. Time moves forward, but softly. The shape of acceptance settles around you. Familiar, unobtrusive kind. And with it, the story continues. As the day moves fully forward, the night becomes less an event and more memory. It settles into the background where things that are complete often go. Nothing pulls it back into focus, and nothing needs to. Memory in such lives did not cling to detail. It preferred impression and mood. What lingered was not what happened, but how the world felt afterward. The household continues its rhythm with ease. Rooms are entered and exited without ceremony. Familiarity smooths every transition. People speak of ordinary matters. Weather, correspondence, plans that extend gently into the future. The night does not require mention to be honored. This quiet absorption of experience is something the past understood well. Not every moment needed a narrative. Some moments simply became part of the foundation. Foundations are rarely visible. They exist to support rather than to be admired. Their strength lies in remaining unnoticed. As years pass, many such nights accumulate. They blur together, forming continuity rather than memory. Continuity steadies the mind. You may notice how this part of the story loosens its grip on chronology. Time feels less linear, more circular. Days echo one another softly. This echo is not repetition for its own sake. It is reassurance repeated until it becomes internal. Once internal, it no longer needs reinforcement. Human beings adapt quickly to rhythm. The body aligns itself with what it can predict. In this alignment, rest becomes easier. The past offered fewer choices but clearer patterns. The nervous system responded by conserving energy. Calm was not pursued, it was embedded. Even conflict, when it arose, unfolded within known limits. Escalation was restrained by expectation. Silence often intervened before intensity could grow. This does not mean suffering was absent. It simply means it was contained differently. Containment can feel heavy, but it can also feel safe. As you listen, you are not asked to adopt these structures. You are only invited to notice their effect. Noticing is enough. Notice how little effort the story now requires. It almost tells itself. This is the threshold where listening turns into drifting. Drifting does not mean disengaging. It means the mind is allowed to float without direction. Sleep often begins here. The voice of the story becomes less distinct. Its edges soften. What remains is tone rather than content. Tone communicates safety more efficiently than information. It bypasses analysis. The body listens first. That is why histories told this way endure. They meet the listener where thought slows. They do not compete for attention. In this softened state, the past feels less distant. It becomes a shared human experience rather than a separate era. Time folds inward. People centuries ago also sought rest. They also leaned into routines when the world felt uncertain. Their methods differed, but the need was the same. The story gently reminds you of this kinship. Not through declaration, but through atmosphere. Shared quiet bridges centuries. As the narrative continues, it leaves behind the specifics of noble houses and customs. It carries forward only their essence. Order, silence, continuity. These elements still exist around you. Perhaps unnoticed, perhaps waiting to be acknowledged. A familiar room, a repeated sound, a predictable night. You may feel a subtle gratitude arise. Not directed at anything specific, but present nonetheless. Gratitude often accompanies calm. The story does not name this feeling. Naming would sharpen it. It allows it to remain diffuse and warm. In this warmth, resistance fades. The need to stay alert diminishes. The body understands that nothing urgent approaches. Sleep does not need to be summoned. It arrives when conditions allow. This story is one of those conditions. As thoughts slow, they may revisit fragments of the narrative. Candlelight, stone walls, early morning quiet. These fragments do not assemble into argument. They drift like images seen through half-closed eyes. Clear enough to feel, soft enough to release. This is the language of rest. The past, in this telling, does not demand to be understood. It asks only to be felt briefly. Feeling passes more easily than understanding. When understanding loosens its hold, the mind rests. When the mind rests, the body follows. This sequence is gentle and reliable. You may notice your breathing aligning with the cadence of the sentences. Slow, even, unforced. The story breathes with you. At this point, the narrative could fade entirely and still fulfill its purpose. What matters has already been conveyed. The rest is continuation. Continuation is comforting. It promises that nothing ends abruptly. Even endings here are gradual. The story will keep moving, but more quietly still. It will shift toward reflection without conclusion. Reflection that does not ask you to respond. For now, remain with what remains. The calm after significance, the space after completion. This is where rest deepens. Nothing more is required of you. The night has already done its work. The story continues softly. With the passing of days, the night we followed recedes further into the past. It becomes less a moment and more a texture woven into life. Time does this naturally, smoothing edges until events feel less personal and more atmospheric. In the lives shaped by tradition, distance arrived quietly. No one paused to mark it. The future simply continued to arrive, one calm morning after another. What remains is not memory in the modern sense, but familiarity, a sense that life is moving as expected. Familiarity rarely announces itself. The house carries this familiarity in its rooms. Walls absorb routine until it becomes part of their presence. Entering such spaces feels immediately grounding. People living within them often describe this feeling indirectly. They spoke of comfort, of things being as they should be. Language softened around stability. Stability does not excite the mind, it soothes it. The brain relaxes when it recognizes known patterns. Over time, these patterns create emotional distance from individual moments. Significance spreads evenly rather than concentrating sharply. Nothing stands out enough to demand attention. This distance is gentle, not dismissive. It allows life to be lived without constant emotional intensity. Calm becomes the default state. In such conditions, people learned to measure life differently. Not by milestones alone, but by continuity. Success meant that nothing broke. The story we are listening to mirrors this approach. It avoids peaks and valleys. It moves steadily, inviting the listener to let go of anticipation. Anticipation keeps the mind awake. Its absence allows rest. This is why the story resists surprises. Even discovery, when it appears, is softened. It arrives as recognition rather than revelation. Recognition feels familiar. You may notice that the narrative now feels farther away, like watching light fade at the edge of evening. Distance creates safety. When events are distant, the nervous system does not prepare for action. It settles instead. This settling is the body's invitation to sleep. The past often reaches us this way, as something already resolved. Resolution, even without clarity, is calming. In the context of this story, resolution came through acknowledgement rather than explanation. The world moved on without needing to speak. Silence completed the cycle. Silence, again, proves its usefulness. It closes doors gently rather than slamming them. Closure without noise allows continuity. As centuries layered over one another, many such nights disappeared entirely from record. Only their effects remained. History advanced quietly. The people themselves faded, but the patterns persisted. Houses were rebuilt, customs adapted, yet the desire for order endured. Human needs remain consistent. Listening now, you are not being asked to remember names or dates. Those details dissolve easily. What remains is sensation. Sensation travels more easily into rest. It does not demand cognitive effort. The story understands this. The cadence slows further. Sentences grow rounder, less directed. Direction is no longer necessary. The listener is trusted to drift. Attention may come and go without consequence. The story does not keep score. In this way, it resembles the environments it describes. Nothing here demands productivity. Presence alone is sufficient. Distance also brings kindness. Judgment softens when time stretches. What once seemed rigid becomes simply part of its era. This kindness is not approval. It is acceptance of complexity without tension. Acceptance calms the mind. As the narrative moves on, it carries less content and more rhythm. Like a familiar road traveled often enough to require no map, the body knows the way. You may feel this knowing in yourself. A sense that you can relax without missing anything important. Nothing crucial is approaching. The mind, freed from vigilance, may begin to wander gently. Images overlap, thoughts fragment. This is not confusion. It is the beginning of rest. The mind rearranging itself without instruction. The story supports this process quietly. At this stage, the past becomes almost abstract, a soft background rather than a sequence of events. Abstraction reduces stimulation. Reduced stimulation invites sleep. The nervous system responds predictably. Calm deepens. The story does not resist this. It allows itself to fade slightly. Fading is intentional. Even if you stop listening actively, the rhythm continues beneath awareness. It carries you forward, like breathing. Time now feels wide, not pressing, not pulling. Wide time allows rest. In this width, concerns loosen their grip. They feel less urgent. The body notices. The story offers no advice, no lessons stated aloud. Lessons are implied through tone. Tone is enough. As you settle further, the narrative prepares to close its circle. Not with an ending, but with a return. Return to quiet. Quiet does not mean absence. It means space. Space is where rest unfolds. Remain in this gentle distance. Nothing will intrude. The story continues, but it does not require you to follow. At a certain point, meaning no longer needs to be held firmly. It loosens its shape and becomes something felt rather than understood. In this softening, the mind finds relief from the effort of interpretation. The story has traveled far enough now that it no longer needs to carry history explicitly. What remains is the atmosphere history leaves behind. Atmosphere lingers longer than facts. In the quiet lives we have been observing, meaning often arrived this way. Not through insight, but through repetition that settled into the body. Understanding came later, if at all. The body is patient with meaning. It does not rush to conclusions. It prefers steady signals that tell it nothing urgent is required. This preference shaped entire ways of living. Rituals, routines, and silences evolved to communicate safety without explanation. Safety was felt, not discussed. As the narrative thins, you may notice how little effort it now takes to stay with it. Attention floats rather than grips. This is not disengagement. It is the natural response to a story that no longer asks to be followed closely. It allows itself to become background. Background is where sleep thrives. The people of the past often experienced life this way. Large portions unfolded without commentary. Only disruptions demanded focus. Disruption wakes the mind. Continuity lets it rest. The story has chosen continuity. Even the idea of reflection here is gentle. It does not analyze, it observes. Observation without reaction is calming. When reflection loses its edge, it becomes presence. Presence does not argue with itself. It simply exists. You may feel the narrative blending with your own internal quiet. The boundary between listening and resting grows thin. This is intentional. The story is no longer moving forward. It is circling softly. Circles have no sharp beginnings or endings. In many traditions, circles represent safety. Nothing enters suddenly, nothing leaves abruptly. Sleep follows this logic. The past now feels less like another time and more like a shared stillness. A place the mind can visit without effort. Distance disappears. This is not immersion, it is resonance. The story resonates rather than occupies. Resonance does not require attention. It hums quietly beneath awareness. The body recognizes it instinctively. As this resonance deepens, thoughts may become less verbal. Images, sensations, and feelings take precedence. Language steps aside. This transition is subtle. Many do not notice it happening. That is part of its effectiveness. The story has done its work by now. It has lowered the pace, softened the edges, and removed urgency. Nothing remains to be resolved. Resolution, in this context, is not an answer, but a release. Release invites rest. You are not asked to remember anything. Memory can sleep too. The night carries the story forward without you. In the world we have visited, nights often ended this way. Not with reflection, but with continuation. Morning arrived without needing explanation. The body learned to trust this cycle. Trust allowed deeper rest. The same trust is offered here. As the narrative fades further, it becomes more like a gentle presence than a sequence of words. Presence is enough. If your mind drifts away completely, nothing is lost. The story does not require witnesses. It continues quietly. This is the final gift of such storytelling. It asks nothing in return. No reaction, no conclusion, no decision. Meaning has softened to rest. Rest does not need meaning to justify itself. It simply is. In this softened space, even curiosity relaxes. There is nothing left to discover. Discovery would only sharpen the mind again. The story knows when to stop offering content. It steps back, leaving space. Space is what the body needs now. As you rest within that space, the rhythm of the narrative aligns with your breathing. Slow, even, unremarkable. Remarkable things do not happen here. Only continuity remains. Continuity without demand. This is the quiet inheritance passed down through generations. You may feel yourself sinking gently into that inheritance. Not the customs themselves, but the calm they created. Calm endures. The story does not close its door. It leaves it slightly open, allowing air to move freely. Openness prevents tension. Soon, even the awareness of listening may fade. This is welcome. Sleep arrives when effort dissolves. Nothing more will be introduced. The story has reached its quietest form. Silence now carries it forward. Remain here or drift beyond. Both are equally allowed. The night is steady. The final movement approaches, not as an ending, but as a settling. Everything finds its place. Now, the story rests more than it moves. It no longer travels forward, but settles downward, like dust easing onto a still surface. What remains is not narrative, but calm continuity. The night we entered at the beginning has dissolved into a wider sense of time. It no longer belongs to one house, one custom, or one century. It belongs to the human need for endings that do not startle. In that old world, nights rarely demanded reflection. They ended simply because sleep arrived. The body knew when to stop holding the day. This knowing was trusted. No one tried to control it too tightly. Rest was allowed, not engineered. As you listen now, the story offers the same permission. Nothing needs to be understood, remembered, or carried forward. The work of attention is complete. What remains is presence without focus. Awareness without effort. This is where the nervous system feels safest. The details that once shaped the story, stone walls, candlelight, quiet corridors, soften into suggestion. They no longer need form. Suggestion is lighter than image. Lightness allows the mind to drift. Drifting allows sleep. The transition happens naturally when nothing resists it. In the lives we have been observing, this moment often passed unnoticed. People slipped into sleep without ceremony. Sleep was not an event, it was a return. To breath, to stillness, to the body's oldest rhythm. The same rhythm continues now. The story has walked beside you long enough. It does not need to lead anymore. It steps slightly behind, letting you move at your own pace. If thoughts arise, they do not interrupt. They pass like distant lights seen through a window. Nothing approaches closely. The sense of being watched or evaluated has faded entirely. There is no audience here, only quiet companionship. Here, no one rests alone. Every story is a soft lantern in the dark. Even as attention fades, presence remains. The past no longer feels distant or heavy. It has blended into a shared human stillness. Time loosens its grip. Breath becomes the primary motion. Slow, steady, unremarkable. The body recognizes this as home. In this state, the mind no longer separates story from silence. Both feel the same. This sameness is comforting. Nothing more will be added. Nothing needs to be concluded. The story has already arrived where it was meant to go. As the quiet deepens, you may sense gratitude without an object, warmth without a cause. These feelings do not require explanation. They arise when effort releases, when vigilance stands down. The night accepts them gently. If tonight's story reminded you of a beautiful memory, feel free to share it below. Not as a response, but as a small light left behind, only when you feel ready. When was the last time you looked up at the night sky and felt at peace? The kind of peace that does not ask questions. That feeling lives here. If this story brought you calm, leave a gentle comment for yourself. A marker of rest rather than engagement. Something quiet just for you. And if you wish to return another night, don't forget to subscribe for more peaceful nighttime journeys. This corner of history will remain slow and welcoming. Now there is nothing left to do. The night holds steady. The story rests.